Okay, so we are going to get started. Okay. Well, let's get started with our next discussion topic. But I'd like to just say, with the topic that we just finished hearing about the symptoms and the experiences, not only from the patients but from the caregivers, we really appreciate that you've all spoken so much about this. It's challenging, and it's such a personal experience to be sharing with many people that you don't know, but it's really been so helpful and valuable and beneficial to us. So thank you for sharing all of those experiences. I would like to ask, I know that we have some advocacy groups in the room, and maybe just with a quick show of hands for those of you here on behalf of the advocacy group, do you feel that what we heard during the first topic session, do you feel that that also represents the many thousands of patients and caregivers in your advocacy groups? Do you feel that that was a good representation? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm glad to see your heads nodding in agreement, so that's good. Okay, so we are going to get started with discussion topic 2. And once again, discussion topic 2 is on current treatment approaches to IPF. And just to remind everyone again, here we're listening for what is your current treatment regimen, what for the patient or for the caregiver, if you can let us know the treatment regimen that your loved one is going through or has experienced. And if you can give us very specific examples on, what are the benefits of it? How do you know if it is working? How do you know it's working? And then on the flip side, what are the downsides? And what are the side effects that you feel? And what is not working for you? And then towards, the later part of the conversation, we'll also talk about the ideal treatment. So let's have our topic 2 panelists come on up. And if you could bring your name cards with you and have a seat at the panel table. And once again, I just want to thank our panelists in advance for preparing your summary statements, and you've worked very hard over the last 2 weeks. What's that? You don't have to, just whichever way, and then we'll just make sure we go and... Okay. And remember to press the red button when it's your turn to speak. And with that, let's get started with Mike.
Okay, I'm Mike Henderson. I'm from Portland, Oregon. And I was diagnosed with IPF in June of 2004 and received a double lung transplant in March of 2006. Since then, I've facilitated 2 pulmonary fibrosis support groups in the Northwest and a lung transplant group there. So I can share my own experience, but I can also relate it to those of about 200 other patients who've been through the same process that I've met through that experience. And I'm one of the very lucky ones. Even today, the only treatment to extend the lives of IPF patients is a lung transplant, and it's not a trivial operation. We hope that changes soon and that there are some therapies approved. But as of today, that's it. And that's a trade-off of a deadly disease for a really difficult chronic condition, which extends the life for most people in the neighborhood of 5 years. Less than 1% of IPF patients will receive a lung transplant, so it's a very rare thing, and I'm very appreciative of the fact I got one. But we desperately need new therapies for IPF to improve both the quality and the quantity of life for these patients. As I said, I was diagnosed in 2004 and I had shortness of breath at elevation at that time. And within 12 months, I was on oxygen 24/7. So it progressed fairly quickly for me. As I was going through that, I would have gone anywhere for treatment for this disease. My only options at the time were pirfenidone, which was available in Japan at that time, a clinical trial for Gleevec, which was a cancer drug at the Mayo Clinic, the IPF cocktail of prednisone, azathioprine, and NAC, and either a trial or off-label prescription for Actimune. I decided that was, I had to decide whether to move someplace, try an unproven cocktail, or try Actimune, and I decided on the latter and pressed for an off-label prescription because I wanted the real thing. And I think every patient, as they look at options of clinical trial versus the real deal, they want the real deal. I was certainly one, but I promised my doctor that I would give back at some point somehow for that. So this is one of those days. This is a give back day. Did it work? No. The Actimune trial failed just about 3 months after I went on the drug. So I switched to the IPF cocktail. And just 2 years ago, they discovered that cocktail did more harm than good for patients. So I don't know if that impacted me or not. But I was blessed to receive a double lung transplant in 2006. And this is my new treatment regimen. So this is the extreme treatment for IPF. This is 1 week's worth of pills, 34 a day. They're not all for IPF, but by far the majority are. Half of them do something, and half of them undo the side effects of the ones that do something. So it's a job just to manage that. So this, along with diet and exercise, are the treatment that keeps me alive. Lots of side effects. Daily GI upset, bone and muscle wasting, skin cancer. I've had 9 skin cancer surgeries already. Tremors, constant risk of rejection and infection that we have to be careful for. But hey, it works, and I'm living life pretty much the way I did, with a few limitations. But it's not a good solution. 1% of all these patients is not getting the job done. So what did I want out of a treatment? I wanted to be able to breathe without using supplemental oxygen. I wanted to be able to take a walk, go fishing, travel, just get across the room without getting short of breath and gasping, go up a flight of stairs without gasping. I wanted to stop the incessant clearing of my throat and the cough that came with it. I wanted to be untethered more than anything. To be attached to that machine or to a tank is not a pleasant experience. I wanted to have energy back that I used to have. I wanted to live longer, better, and to let my family know that I was going to be there for them and with them. Patients are dying every day of IPF, and it's a terrible way to die. I've actually been there at the end for a number of patients, and it is not a pleasant experience. So we need treatments that can stop the progression, at least improve the quality of life, and hopefully prolong life without requiring a lung transplant. We need to develop a system where promising therapies can be tried by desperate patients once they have passed a safety test. We need to rethink the clinical trial guidelines and consider ways to get more drugs in the pipeline and promising drugs to patients much sooner than they are today. Patients are willing to take some risk. When your life is slipping away, you're very likely to take a risk. It seems to make sense. And only you can shorten this approval cycle by developing new clinical trial designs that can get us more aggressively towards these goals. So I thank you for listening, and to all of us this afternoon, and for all you do to keep us healthy and safe.
Mike, thank you so much. Okay, we have Heather next.
Just a quick reminder,
Yes.
Feel free to pull those mics close to your mouth so the people on the web can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? My name is Heather. I'm from Pennsylvania, around the Harrisburg area. Like Mike, I'm a transplant patient, but I'm going to tell a little bit of a different story than some of the statistics that he went into. This disease is genetic in my family. My father was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis by the National Institute of Health in the late 1970s. He participated in one drug study. He felt he had more energy. I don't think he lasted much more than a month on that study. He came down to here, Bethesda, Maryland, to get some medication. I don't know what it was, but because I was really young, so I don't remember everything. But I do remember that he was on high doses of prednisone, and he had severe acne on his back. And I know it was constantly red, and it looked extremely painful, but he just wanted a transplant, and it didn't happen. So he died in 1981. He was only 41 years old, and I was 9 at the time. In the mid-20s, I was diagnosed with asthma. I had symptoms of tightness of the chest. I was wheezing with exercising. I tried to run, but it really didn't work out very well for me. The drugs I was given were inhalers, rescue inhalers, and daily inhalers, prednisone tapers, and anxiety medication. And I did this for years, on and off constantly. They never worked. Nothing ever helped me. Nothing ever took that tightness in my chest away, and I never had an asthma attack. So, I never could breathe better after I inhaled the steroids. It got very frustrating. But about 10 years after this, I asked for my own chest x-ray. I was being monitored by 3 different doctors. I had clumped fingernails. I was out of breath, and I couldn't do a flight of steps without being out of breath. And I just finally said enough is enough, and I had to be my own advocate and ask for a chest x-ray. At the time, I had a constant cough, like I said earlier. It sounded like a sneeze more than a cough. I probably had that maybe 8 years. I had severe clubbing of the fingernails, and I remember doctors specifically looking at my fingernails. Never said a word at all. I didn't even know. And I had cramping of my rib cage so much. And I know I discussed this a little earlier, so I'm not going to go into that much. But I was prescribed cough medicine, muscle relaxers, and that was it. Didn't really have much other than prednisone for that too. When I was diagnosed, I was sent to a transplant hospital. And what they put me on was prednisone and acetylcysteine. So when you take acetylcysteine, it's awful. It smells awful and it tastes awful. So you put it in fruit juice to mask everything. And I think I did it twice a day, if I remember correctly. Well, the combination of the fruit juice and the prednisone blew me up with like 30 pounds within a matter of weeks and 2 months. And that was kind of going to go the opposite direction I needed to go because I needed to transplant. So gaining weight was not going to help me at all. I needed to lose it. So I finally transferred to a different hospital, and the doctor took me off everything. He said, this is not going to help you. It's going to hurt you more than it's helping you. Although I did feel good on it. My knees felt good and my joints felt good. You know, I was eating way too much. Sorry, my mouth is really dry from all my medication. I had a double lung transplant in 2011. I was 39 years old. It was a very complicated transplant. I was on the VA ECMO machine. I was put on that as an emergency surgery. I was on a VA ECMO machine for 5 days. My colon, I had colon issues. My colon died. I had to get a colonectomy, and then I got the C. diff virus. So I was in quarantine for 10 days after that. So it was pretty tough. I know the doctors, I joke with my doctor, I'm like, you couldn't kill me if you tried, but I think they could have. But I really don't know how I made it through all that. The doctor said, you have age on your side, and that's what he told my mom or my family, because he's like, I don't think she's going to live, but she does have age on her side. So, as you know, Mike discussed there's plenty of downsides to lung transplant. There's plenty of good sides, but I'm going to talk about the downsides a little bit more. Like Mike said, we take medication all the time. We take it every 12 hours. And obviously, many of us know that statistics of receiving a lung transplant for pulmonary fibrosis is extremely small. Most of us do not qualify to even be listed because of age, comorbidity issues, financial reasons, medical insurance premiums, and pharmaceutical coverage. If you don't have any of that, you don't even get an evaluation. For those that are lucky enough to be listed, the wait is tremendously stressful. We need to be prepared for that call and leave at a moment's notice. Everything we do is based on the fact that the hospital will call at any second. So bags are packed, we stay close to home, and have all loose ends tied up. I personally was told to have plan A, B, C, and D. I had multiple plans in place, but I couldn't have prepared for what I really went through, which was lifeline. I wasn't prepared for that. I went into respiratory failure. I had pulmonary hypertension as well as a secondary disease because this disease was not caught in time. I needed oxygen 5 years before I was actually prescribed oxygen, so I had pulmonary hypertension. So I was a priority 1 transplant in a snow and ice storm. So like I said, I was finally medical vaced to a hospital where I was put on an emergency VA ECMO machine. I know I'm a miracle. I know I'm alive for a reason. And I am so blessed to have a second chance at life, but there are definitely downsides that we really need to remember. A transplant was given to me to extend my life, but I do realize that I probably will not live until retirement. I will be working full-time the rest of my life to keep myself alive. I take anti-rejection medication every 12 hours. The medication have their own side effects that I deal with on a daily basis, such as memory loss, tremors, confusion, migraine, sensitivity to sun, thinning hair, chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, flu-like symptoms, etc. I am lucky enough to have an employer that has helped me with some work modifications because I still have major sleeping issues. But I know if I don't have that job, it's going to be very hard to find a new one. And I have met many patients that they couldn't keep the job because they were in the hospital off and on constantly, and they're of great working age. They're only in their 40s, early 40s. So that's really tough. Who wants to be on disability at 40 if you can really work? But no one wants to hire you. Excuse me. Okay, I take a lot of my vacation time for doctor's visits instead of going on vacation, which I would really love to do. But and I see a lot of doctors. I see pulmonology, obviously, neurology, psychology, rheumatology, dermatology, sleep medicine, family physician, and of course our monthly blood work. As a patient, I know it's been discussed, I do feel very, very alone, even after transplant. You think you're going to be somewhat normal, and you're just not normal. And the one thing I realized, when I was sick and I looked so awful when I was on oxygen, people would open the door for me. Oh my gosh, she's on oxygen, she's dying. And then after my transplant, I must have looked really good because doors were slamming into my face. So, I became like this hidden disease or hidden problems that I still had, but really no one could see it because I still was getting my color back and no tank. But because I choose to be an advocate, I have a very heavy heart for all the patients that have passed. A support group was started in Hershey, Pennsylvania in 2009. Since then, everybody has passed, but 2 patients. I have been emotionally devastated, and sometimes I wonder if I'm truly blessed to have a transplant, or if I'm being tortured. Sorry. This disease has been killing so many patients for decades. My father died at age 41. When I was diagnosed at 28 years of age, a treatment still didn't exist. It was hard to grasp the idea that we were so advanced in cancer and HIV, which was devastating in the 80s, but we still don't have anything for pulmonary fibrosis.
Thank you, Heather. Do you have any final remarks?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Talina?
First, I want to thank the FDA for having these hearings and allowing the patients and families affected by IPF to have a voice. My name is Talina Cook, and I was a caregiver for my mom after she was diagnosed with advanced IPF in 2003. She had a diffusing capacity of 27% at diagnosis. She passed away 6 years later from respiratory arrest on September 27, 2009. 2 years prior to her diagnosis, 2 years prior to 2003, she had been diagnosed with emphysema. She was already using supplemental oxygen and on prednisone when she was correctly diagnosed with IPF. At that time, her supplemental oxygen liter flow was increased, as was her prednisone, and she was also prescribed azathioprine, NAC, and interferon. Her pulmonologist saw her every few months for updated pulmonary function tests and a 6-minute walk test to watch her progression and see if any of the medication was working. After some months, she was taken off the azathioprine because her PFTs were not stabilizing. She was later taken off the interferon, again because her PFTs were not stabilizing. She continued the prednisone at a lower dose, continued the NAC, and the supplemental oxygen. After the first 9 months to a year, her PFTs had stabilized, so the medication she was taking was continued. The oxygen would be titrated up to a higher liter flow over the years as her IPF progressed. She was already on an osteoporosis medication to combat bone loss from long-term prednisone use. She was also on medication for other conditions like hypothyroidism, elevated cholesterol, and essential tremors. My mom was really good about maintaining a healthy diet and staying as active as possible. She took vitamins regularly, she got her flu shot every year, but her activity at this point was going for walks around her apartment building or at the beach, cooking her own meals, or doing her own shopping. As her PFTs finally stabilized, she wasn't seeing her pulmonologist as often. Most of her day-to-day medical care was handled by her primary doctor. At this point, she was not in a drug trial, and there were no real medications to treat IPF itself. So her medical care was all about managing other conditions caused by the IPF and learning to live with it. For instance, her heart was in very good condition upon diagnosis in 2003, but over the years the IPF took its toll, causing her heart to work harder and to make up for the work her lungs could no longer do. She started having ongoing fluid retention, which was treated with Lasix. She was also prescribed a high dose of potassium to combat the side effect of Lasix because it strips the body of potassium. A few years past her diagnosis, she developed a low ejection fraction of 30%. Her heart was not pumping blood out fast enough. She was then put on enalapril and Corig to assist her heart in doing its job. Sometime in 2008, she started developing a rash low on her shins. The rash started spreading and she saw many doctors. It was diagnosed as cellulitis at one point and she was prescribed antibiotics. The rash never did clear. It continued to worsen and spread, and eventually she had open sores on both legs. None of the doctors ever figured it out. She was treated with topical creams, none of which worked. We never officially knew what caused the rash. Over the years, she was prescribed antibiotics a number of times for pneumonia, which is very common for someone with PF. One of the last medications she was prescribed before she passed away was a narcotic cough syrup. Most with pulmonary fibrosis have problems with cough. Some are severe right away, others are not. Her cough wasn't worsening until the summer of 2009. At that time, she needed better cough control as her cough was quite bad. The narcotic cough syrup helped. Her supplemental oxygen needs increased over the years as her IPF progressed. As her PFTs worsened and her oxygen liter flow went up, her shortness of breath also increased. Even though her PFTs were staying fairly stable, she wasn't taking a quick, steep decline. She had developed a small mass on each lung. Because her IPF was so advanced, a biopsy of those masses was too risky. They had to be watched by CT scan to look for changes. For more than a year, there were no changes in either one of those masses. Finally, in February of 2009, she had a sudden onset of shortness of breath. A new CT scan showed that both masses had doubled in size, with her diffusing capacity now at 13%. Her oxygen liter flow was increased dramatically from 8 liters per minute to 12 liters per minute. This meant the need for fancy configuration of oxygen equipment to get her more than 10 liters of oxygen. It was also determined that the low dose of prednisone she was on was not really doing much for her, so it was discontinued. The Lasix she was taking for water retention was helping less and less. She had to spend a lot more time laying down with her feet elevated above her heart to help with fluid retention. All of this was making her less independent and less active. Losing her independence due to the oxygen needs and the inability to get up and move around like she wanted made her depressed. Early on in her PF, she was very positive and she was willing to fight this disease and live with IPF as long as possible. As she neared the end of her life, she became more depressed and was willing to give in to the disease and let it take its course. There was no treatment, and there still isn't in our country, and the oxygen and medication she was taking weren't helping as much as they had been early on. She felt very defeated. An ideal treatment would be something that stops the progression of the disease in its tracks. Since lung fibrosis cannot yet be reversed, the damage is already done. However, having no new damage in the future would be a positive. Knowing that someone could live a normal life without progression of the disease, even if supplemental oxygen is needed, would be helpful. Knowing there is a medication to try, or more than one, would give patients hope where they have none. Quality of life counts.
Thank you so much, Talina. And now we have Teresa.
Hi, my name is Theresa Barnes. I want to thank the FDA for, just like Talina did, in including the patient voice in drug development. Not just here today, but on your panels when drugs and devices are being reviewed. It's so important to have the patient voice as part of that. I look around the room, and it's like a reunion in a way. There's almost nobody I haven't seen before or met before or don't know very well. And I pray that this room does not catch on fire, because if it does, we're in serious trouble. We'll probably never find a treatment. Many of the people here, including the advocates, the patient foundations, the physicians, the researchers, the sponsors, and you, are the reason that change is coming. Many of the people here are patients and family members, and on behalf of those patients, family members, and advocates, I would respectfully ask that the patient voice be included earlier in the drug development process. The opportunity to provide valuable input and insight into each individual drug development project begins before treatment trials are designed, before they're developed, and before they're launched. I would suggest consideration of a three-way communications between pharmaceutical and device companies, the FDA, and patients and patient advocacy groups, beginning upon the initial planning for a clinical trial. So 10 to 15 years sooner. I'm a patient family member of 5 now deceased IPF patients. I serve as a patient advocate for patients as Vice President of the Coalition for Pulmonary Fibrosis. I was a founding board member of the organization back in 2001. I serve as a patient advocate for the American Thoracic Society. Some of my colleagues are here, and I'm pleased to see the patient groups out. I work with key IPF scientists and the ATS to bring together researchers a couple of years ago in the first fibrosis across organs effort that included heart, lung, liver, kidney, and skin And we kind of like to say, we want to get to the lung of the matter. I also helped scientists and the Westy Foundation of America develop the first fibrosis across species meeting, bringing together pulmonary scientists and veterinary scientists for comparative research efforts, looking at naturally occurring IPF in dogs, horses, cats, donkeys, and other species of domestic animals that share our environment. I served on an FDA panel several months ago for a device that has now been approved for lung transplant. I work every day to improve the options for this disease. I worry about the future. Will my twin sister, my brother, and me have to worry about this disease? Will my cousins and our children have to worry? It's kind of like walking on a tightrope and you're scared of heights. My father was the first person in my family diagnosed with IPF. It's likely, however, that his father and his uncle also had the disease decades earlier, but were diagnosed with other conditions. My father was diagnosed in 1994 and died after a failed lung transplant in 1996. In 2001, my father's brother was diagnosed. He died within a year of that diagnosis. It was then that many members of my family, including me, joined the genetic research efforts in the disease. Through a research project, my aunt was diagnosed with IPF the same year that we joined the study. She died after surgical complications that exacerbated her disease in 2003. That same year, another uncle was diagnosed with IPF. He died in 2005. In 2005, another uncle was diagnosed with IPF. He died in 2007. I saw the writing on the wall, and I talked to the advocacy group, and I decided that I should spend my life working on this. So in my family, an entire generation of 5 siblings is gone for the same reason. Yet each of these patients actually had different experiences, even though they also had the same experience. From the time my father died in 96 and through the deaths of all of his siblings, nothing changed, at least not from a treatment perspective. And today, as you know, treatment options have not yet changed. My father's treatment began 6 months before he was diagnosed with IPF. He was treated symptomatically for cough and for shortness of breath with inhalers, and a lot of people have talked about those, like albuterol, that had absolutely no effect on his symptoms. It was the lack of response to therapy that led him to seek a second opinion at a major IPF research center. He was quickly diagnosed with IPF at that center, and he was told there was no FDA-approved therapy and that he had a very short time to live. He was also told that there were no clinical trials in the disease. This was 1996. He was immediately placed on prednisone and prescribed oxygen during exertion. The prednisone, as some people have mentioned, made him gain a little bit of weight, but the most concerning response was the change in his demeanor and his level of tolerance. He'd always been a really kind and reasonable person, but on prednisone he became irritable and argumentative, and on one very memorable occasion, he punched out the next door neighbor in front of a police officer. Not a good idea, and after bailing him out of jail, I made a phone call to his pulmonologist and begged him to take him off the drug. He said, oh, in a minority of cases, that's a side effect. My father seemed to grow more fragile on the steroid use, but clearly his left hook was not one of his problems. He also experienced trouble with his teeth that he felt was caused by the prednisone and eventually caused him to have many of his teeth removed. I actually married a dentist just in case in future. Over a period of months, as my father began being evaluated for lung transplant, he was placed on Cytoxan and immunosuppressant. It was difficult to tell if the drug caused any problems that he had, but he felt as though his condition was changing. His shortness of breath was increasing, as was his level of anxiety. Now, this was a really calm man for all of his life until this point, and he was never nervous or anxious. But it seemed as though these shakes and tremors, almost like he was physically shivering, were happening more and more. He was never given medication for anxiety, nor did he ever ask for it. He coped with it by drinking coffee. I think, and actually lots of it, all day long, every day. And actually, maybe it made things worse, maybe it didn't, but it warmed him up physically. He wore sweaters even in the summer when he was sick because he said that breathing, he felt like the oxygen made him cold. And he complained that it gave him headaches too. Now, he had had headaches throughout his life, but they just got worse when he started using the supplemental oxygen. He also had problems with his lips drying out and his nose constantly being irritated and red because of the cannulas. He used lip balms and creams to alleviate the symptoms, but it was really difficult to control because he had to wear the oxygen. He used oxygen almost from the start of his diagnosis. At first, he was just using a liter or two, but it increased over time. He complained that the bulkiness of the tank was a problem, but he found ways to incorporate it into his life, and he actually bought a golf cart to drive around the neighborhood with his tanks. He was able to use a concentrator when he left his house, and it seemed to give him what he needed to remain active for at least another year or so. Eventually, he was limited to a tethered oxygen machine at his home, and getting outside was pretty much impossible. His cough was often debilitating. He would have what he called coughing fits, and when he would have such violent coughs that he couldn't catch his breath, and he would have to calm himself afterwards. Even though he tried cough drops, he had cough syrups, they, suggested breathing techniques, but nothing seemed to impact the cough. He usually kept hard candy in his pocket and tried to cope with the coughing episodes. Sometimes the cough was so violent that he couldn't stand upright. And if he were in public, he'd have to quickly sit down until he was able to recover and compose himself. He found that having a large cloth with him that he could cough into would help his embarrassment, but it would also help muffle the noise that someone else mentioned. It was one of his most difficult and embarrassing issues. He suffered what I now know as a couple of acute exacerbations. He was hospitalized both times and given antibiotics and increased oxygen levels. He was treated for an unexplained fever and for low blood pressure, but the reason for the sudden worsening was never explained. He recovered from both the exacerbations, but with each, his condition worsened noticeably. He became weak and fragile. I don't think I mentioned that he was in his 50s when he was diagnosed. He'd been asked to lose weight to be placed on this transplant list, but even though he was not a very large man, he was not given guidelines for losing weight, by the way, and patients still today are not given guidelines to help them lose weight. But he followed a restricted diet for a few months, and up until that point, he lost the weight, and he felt like he could breathe better because his diaphragm was a little bit freer. But the weight loss actually seemed to weaken him more. He waited 17 months on the transplant list in North Carolina, and this was in 1996 when the transplant list was based on how long you waited, not how sick you were. Thankfully, that's changed. But my father got a call for transplant 6 times in 6 months, and each time the organ was not usable. Ironically, the device I just was part of a panel on, maybe families will not experience that as much.
Thank you, Talina. Any final remarks?
Yes, patients and their lifestyle is really important. Lifestyle drugs are important. So if we can't solve this problem today, let's do something that improves patients' symptoms, that improves their quality of life, that can help them to move forward, at least for a little bit of time with their families, so that they're not faced with all of the issues that these patients have mentioned, so that they have some options. And then let's move quicker through the transplant process, if that's available. And then the drug development process, it's really important that we include the patient voice sooner. And also, I have a 4-year-old daughter. My goal is to make sure that by the time she's older, that she says pulmonary fibrosis is something that killed people in the old days. And people don't die of it anymore.
Thank you, Teresa. And I apologize. I said Talina. I meant to say Teresa.
That's okay.
But thank you very much.
I'll answer to whatever.
So let's give our panelists a round of applause. Just as with the previous discussion, I know it's not easy. We appreciate so much. It's not easy to come and talk about your experiences or your loved one's experiences, but we sincerely appreciate that you did. Thank you. Okay, so let's just to quickly summarize some of the high points that or some of the major points that we heard from our panel, and I'd like to do another show of hands if you can. We heard about the range of treatments and many of the downsides of those treatments, but Mike received a transplant, and he mentioned that he had this IPF cocktail and taking this range of medications on a daily basis. Heather, you mentioned some of the downsides, not only that your dad experienced on prednisone, but also you experienced. You mentioned the acne that your dad, as a side effect that he had, and you've talked about the weight gain and the tremors. Talina, you talked about, for your mom, you talked about the increasing oxygen needs as the disease progressed, and how even with the treatments, the symptoms weren't stabilizing. And finally, Teresa, you talked about some of the headaches and the cold, dry lips from the oxygen that your dad had to use. And I'm curious, did that resonate with those of you in the audience? I know I saw a lot of heads nodding as the panelists were speaking, but did some of those treatments and also the downsides, did those resonate with you? If so, can you raise your hand and show us? Okay. Okay, great. And also another interesting point that I'd like to do another show of hands for is we heard mentioned on the panel and even in the previous discussion that there was a time when early on it appeared that some of the patients or the caregivers said that they were misdiagnosed, whether it was asthma or pneumonia. How many of you does that resonate with? Looks like the majority of you. Okay. And FDA panel, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask before we get started with topic 2? Okay, great. Okay, so let's get our clickers out, and we're going to do a polling question. And everybody on the panel have your clickers ready? Okay. So the question is, have you ever used any of the following drug therapies to help reduce the symptoms of IPF? And you can check all that apply. A, pulmonary rehabilitation. B, corticosteroids. C, immunosuppressants. D, N-acetylcysteine. E, investigational therapy. F, other prescription medications such as the acid reflux therapy or inhalers. Or G, I'm not sure. So take a minute. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you have taken other prescription medications, and then we have, again, a large portion of you did pulmonary rehab and also are taking corticosteroids. And then we also have the N-acetylcysteine. Let's see, we have some of you that took the immunosuppressants and tried investigational therapies, and then others that said they're not sure. So what do the web results look like?
We have about 70% say pulmonary rehabilitation, 60% corticosteroids, 22% immunosuppressants, 61% NAC, 22% investigational therapy, and 78% say another prescription medicine.
Okay. So let's, being that this was the majority on the web and also in person, let's start with some of the other prescription medications that you're taking, that the majority of you have said that you're taking. So would anybody like to start off by telling us what it is that you take to manage the symptoms, and then again, be as specific as possible on how that does or does not work for you? Yes.
Thank you. For me, and this is just my opinion, some of these things here aren't, like, to me, they're not really treatments as much as trying to see what may or may not work. I don't, because they don't, some of them don't work. I do, pulmonary rehab is the biggest thing for me that is number one that works on that list, to help us to try to strengthen our bodies and our lungs. I do take NAC. It has been proven through a clinical study that it doesn't help for some of us, and I'm one of them. I still take it, thinking that maybe it does help with some of the breathing and the cough, and you get to where you're afraid not to. And I do take an acid reflux. I do that because acid reflux can reflux back into your lungs, and so that's more of a preventive for me. And and so the doctor has given me that, and I think it works.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Yes.
Bill again. The pulmonary rehabilitation was very helpful for me because it helped me in that state of mind to feel like you're at least getting out and doing something, trying something, finding out how much you can exercise and then adjusting your oxygen. You're learning about those kind of things. So it's trying to learn how to live with the condition and get out and do something as opposed to sitting around. And the other thing is the acid reflux. They put me on that just to make sure that I don't have any irritation of the throat or the larynx. What's right? The tube right there. They're kind of intermixed. They're esophagus, I guess, so that you're not getting any of that acid reflux going back down into the lung area. And I'm sure that it helps some. I haven't seen a big difference because I think in that cough, the biggest thing that I noticed is sometimes it's a different kind of tickle in different places in the chest. Sometimes it's a feel, a wheeze, a crackle, a vibration, and you breathe. And those kind of things kind of make you want to cough too. So if acid reflux were exacerbating that, then it's good to try to eliminate that.
Okay, thank you, Bill. So we've heard so far then pulmonary rehab, addressing the symptom of just sort of managing how to increase your breathing capacity, it sounds like, and managing that. And then we're hearing with the acid reflux to help manage the coughing symptom. That seems to help with that. Okay. And yes, let's take a comment up here, and then we'll get back there.
Thank you. My name is Teresa, and first of all, I would like to express our thanks, at least for me and my wife, for
Could you hold your microphone up a little bit?
having
Thank
this
you.
meeting and this program to gather some information actually about the patients and the relatives which they are involved with. And about the medication which you were inquiring, we have been using pirfenidone for our patients in the past 3 years, and it has been very good indeed. It kind of has stabilized his situation and condition, and actually he's been living actually more than the first prognosis of his doctor. And even though he's been going through different regimens, including the physical therapy, but on 2 occasions, this physical therapy hasn't been too successful with him. But it kind of drained him. He was tired and all that, and it took him about 2-3 weeks to get back where he was before going to the physical therapy. And about the cortisone, then the doctor had to change the doses of the cortisone he was receiving, along with the pirfenidone. to bring it to an optimum level. And it was kind of a, game and catch and run. But one thing for sure we have observed is the effect of pirfenidone. That's been a very good drugs, of course. It's not being offered in the US. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And we had a comment back here.
I keep hearing that NEC was, in the Panther IPF trial was like, forget it, it doesn't work. But then again, a few years ago, we had the Iphigenia trial in Europe, which said that it did work, and that's actually the reason why we're all on NEC. I take inhaled NEC, and it's all cheap, and it works for me, because if I don't take it in a few days, I really start to cough a lot, and my kids will tell me, you go back in the kitchen and take your inhaled NEC. Pulmonary rehabilitation has the limit of like your funding or your, how do you call it, your, and I would suggest everybody go to a gym afterwards, and please do it, because it works. And I compare it to an engine. If the engine runs great, everything goes a lot easier. And I'm also on acid reflux and all the other kind of things. So, thank you.
Thank you. Now you bring up a good point, which I'd like to ask to the group, is do you feel do you feel the effect of your medication, so that if you didn't take it, that symptom comes back, and does it come back in a different way if you've tried a medication and say you don't take it? What do you feel when? Yes.
This is Diane. I had a VATS procedure done back in March, and I had to get off of the steroids that I was on. And as I was being weaned off of the steroids, my breathing became extremely difficult, to the point where I really wondered sometimes if I was going to be able to breathe. When I saw my doctor again, he moved up the VATS procedure so I could get back on the steroids just to help me with breathing. If I don't take my acid reflux medicine, I'm miserable. It makes not much of a difference. I'm also on immunosuppressant drugs, and I did have pulmonary rehab.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Diane. Any other comments? Let's go to the web and see what we're hearing on the web. Sorry. We're hearing a lot of the same type of comments on the web. There's mixed results about the effectiveness of NAC. People are also a bit mixed on prednisone. Some say it works, some say it doesn't, but pretty much all recognize the bad side effects that come from it. Lots of folks on acid reflux medication as well, and immunosuppressants for those with transplants. Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to share additional thoughts on some of the treatments that you're specifically taking, or as a caregiver that your loved one has taken? Yes, Martina.
It's interesting as you have these questions, how many do you have to click on to respond? But I'll just say for Douglas, I notice a difference, and he notices it too when he does go through his pulmonary rehabilitation treatment. I think he's able to do some things a lot longer as he's going through his rehab treatment. He's tried the NAC, but it really didn't work for him. Thankfully, in being diagnosed with PF, he had some acid reflux issues, but with the prescription of the pantoprazole, it definitely helps him. And when he doesn't take it, it has he can feel that effect immediately. He also takes Adcirca, which is another medication, and that's being clocked actually by the company regularly. They call when they know he's getting down to that last week of medication, so that's being closely monitored as well.
So as a follow-up question, you mentioned that the pulmonary rehab is helping. and that he's able to do more things. What is he able to do now that you
Well,
know that it's working?
I just noticed his, I would guess, say stamina or his ability to kind of walk around and do things. He's not as, getting back to some of the topic one questions, not as fatigued. I was mentioning to Mishka that, he's at a place where he's lifting 25 pounds, during his rehab session, that, he's almost at the full capacity of what they can do for him, which is a good thing as they're now getting ready to prep him for, to go to the committee for transplant.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Martina.
Thank you so much. Sally from Patients Like Me. I'm interested because of the way the question is written that we're talking about drug therapies, and yet one of the most effective things seems to be pulmonary rehab. And so I'm just wondering from others in the room if they have other experiences with non-drug therapies or interventions that they use that are actually quite effective. The other concern I have, and it a couple of times came up, and I know it's not FDA's domain, but it really is a shame that someone can get a lot of benefit at pulmonary rehab or any other physical therapy, for example, reach the maximum goals that are set, and then maybe no longer eligible for it. So it just speaks to the feeling and function of how do we have PROs that actually are telling us a bit more about what the real experience is. And sometimes it may be that we need some things that are non-drug therapies that are in combination with the clinical trial experience as a PRO to see how do those in combination help affect overall quality of life and actually how the patients are doing. So I would just like to know if there's other interventions beyond that non-drug therapy that people are talking about.
And thank you, Sally. And you bring up a great point, and we will be getting to the non-drug therapies. That's coming up right after we complete the discussion on the drug therapies, but you bring up an excellent point. Thank you. So does anybody want to comment additionally on some of, for example, the corticosteroids, taking them, what did you see as a benefit? Did you see a benefit? And then did you see a downside?
My name's Leslie Steinberg. My mom she did pulmonary rehab. She did the steroids, also the investigational therapy. None of them worked except for the steroids. However, the steroids would work for a limited time, and she would, of course, feel awful, and she would go on them and off of them and off of them, and over time they stopped working altogether.
Thank you, Leslie. Anybody else? So let me ask a question, as Leslie brought up the time as a factor. So speaking of time, how long do you normally give a treatment to decide that this is working or it's not working before you go back to your doctor or make the decision to have to try something else? Does anybody want to comment on that? Yes, right up here.
Jim McSaney again. I'm on like four different things, and I can't tell whether any of them are treating or working or not, but I keep on using them.
So what are you using, Jim, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm using the acid reflux thing, a cough medicine, an allergy for my runny nose, and Profenadol.
Okay. So let's do a quick show of hands before we move on to our next polling question. How many of you does that resonate with, that you're taking something and you're not sure if it's working, but you're going to keep taking it, not knowing whether that particularly is working? Okay. So we have about 6 hands that were raised. Okay, so let's get our clickers out and move to the next polling question. And Sally, this gets to your point. Okay, so besides your drug therapies, what else are you doing to help reduce your symptoms of IPF? Again, check all that apply. Oxygen therapy, surgery such as lung transplantation, C, lifestyle changes such as limit activity or changes to your home, D, other therapies not mentioned, or E, I am not doing or taking any therapies to treat symptoms. Okay. So we see that the majority of you that are majority of patients or caregivers responding on behalf of their loved ones, that oxygen therapy is really one of the most, it's come up the most as something that you're doing to reduce symptoms, followed by lifestyle changes, limiting activity or changes to your home. We also have some of you that have had surgery, and then other therapies not mentioned, and we'll certainly hear some of those too. How about on the web? What are we seeing there?
87% oxygen therapy, 20% surgery. Everyone who responded on the web, 100% said lifestyle changes, and 27% said other therapies not mentioned.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get to the lifestyle changes in just a minute, but we've heard some comments on how oxygen therapy, that you've had to increase the oxygen, the dose of oxygen that you've needed as the disease progressed. Could somebody share your experiences on taking oxygen therapy and how that has evolved for you over time? Or if you're speaking on behalf of a loved one, how did that evolve for them? Anybody want to share some? Yes, Talina.
When my mom was first diagnosed, well, like I said, she had already been on oxygen for her misdiagnosis of emphysema, and she was on 2 liters pulse, so she was able to run around with a real small container. It fit on a belt that went on her waist, and she could go for hours on that one little container of oxygen. When she was finally diagnosed correctly with IPF, she went immediately to 4 liters continuous. So at that point, when you're talking about even 4 liters continuous, a POC would not work, which, we didn't even have access to that back in 2003. As it progressed, she ended up, before she passed away, she ended up on 12 liters. And honestly, what she passed away from was a septic infection and went into respiratory arrest. But had she continued to live out the duration of her IPF to the very, very end, she would have ended up on a lot more. I know of patients from the support groups that are on 35 and 40 liters of oxygen and using, 2 cannulas and a mask coming from various different machines just to get that much oxygen flow. Oxygen is probably the most overlooked therapy, and everyone needs oxygen to survive. So it's something that needs heavily looked at, and I don't know if that's something that the FDA looks at or who looks at that, but it is a progressive disease, and it will progress to where most patients will need a very high level of oxygen. So it is a definite problem.
Thank you, Talina. Yes, Bill.
A couple points about oxygen therapy that I would offer is I think that the doctors, I'm working with a very good heart and lung transplant center, and I have nothing but good things to say about my experience and the doctors and other staff there. But I think there needs to be better. Those people aren't with me every day. They don't watch me go up and down the stairs or when I get out of the shower and I'm panting for breath just by toweling off or whatever. And they can ask those questions, I can tell them, but I think there needs to be a better system for them to know when to change our prescriptions so that when it goes to the oxygen company, they accommodate us by bringing the new tank or a new concentrator or something that has more oxygen level in it, that type of thing. The other comment that I'd make, and you asked at the beginning of this whole session, is what do you need? One innovative thing that I need about oxygen is a way to adjust the oxygen as I do things. For example, I'm in the house and I'm sitting down. I'm looking at Facebook on my little laptop. I don't need much oxygen. I can sit there at 2 liters per minute. Then I get up and get coffee and move around, get my cereal, and I need to be at 4 or 5. And then I walk upstairs to take a shower. I need to be at 7. And, and so forth. So it'd be great to have an app, because there's an app for everything that, that communicates with your oxygen concentrator to make those adjustments as you go about the house, or wherever you are, visiting friends at a party or picnic, whatever. so you don't have to be there next to it, because if I turn it up to 7 or 8 when I go upstairs, and then I lay down in the bed, I've got to have somebody else turn it down, or I got to go back downstairs and turn it down and go back upstairs and hope that I survive.
Thank you, Bill. I saw a lot of heads nodding, so let's do a show of hands here. How many think it would be, as part of an ideal treatment, that it would be beneficial to have oxygen therapy that sort of, changes based on what activity that you're doing, to be able to have that control on that therapy? The majority of you. And I'd be interested to ask those on the web that question too, and see how they respond. Okay? Yes?
I think the one thing that patients are concerned with, and I've always been like, well, forget it. If I need more oxygen, I'm cranking it up. And if I don't need as much right then I'm turning it down. For some people, some patients, they're afraid if the prescription right now says 2 liters, they won't go beyond 2 liters with their concentrator or anything. We have that ability to change the number. And it's important that we do that and let our doctors know. I'm sorry, doctors, if that's not the right information, but as patients, it's helpful. And I think that people need to remember that.
Thank you, Diane. Okay. So how about, we did hear some downsides on the oxygen therapy. As I mentioned before, Teresa, you had mentioned your father had the dry lips. He felt very cold taking the oxygen. Does anybody want to talk about the downsides? We've also heard that it's hard to kind of, take with you when you're traveling. But any downsides that you'd like to talk about specifically to the oxygen therapy? Yes. Let's hear from Heather.
When I was first diagnosed and I was put on oxygen, I was put on liquid. And I had no idea there was other options out there. And I hated liquid oxygen. It felt like I had a brain freeze all the time. And it dissipated. So I was still trying to work 8-hour days. And I didn't need it while I was sitting down. But by the time I go into work and come back out, it was gone, whether I used it or not. So it was impossible to have an active life with liquid oxygen. So I eventually turned to the gas and got backpacks and strapped it on and just started going. So that's how I did it. But
thank you. So I'm going to let those of you on the web know that we'll be taking phone calls in just a bit. So if you could get your thoughts together for that. In the meantime, I'd like to ask, many of you also mentioned that you've made lifestyle changes. And earlier on, we had heard from Kurt, I remember, saying that you made some changes in your home. You got rid of the carpet. Can somebody share with us some of the lifestyle changes that you've made? Yes.
I'm Laura, and the change that I had to make was very drastic, and I know that some others have been in the same position that I'm in. We have cords or tubes that will go 50 feet, and anything beyond that really doesn't give you much for oxygen because it has to go through that. So keeping that in mind, I had to give up my home. I had a condo, and I had 5 levels, no gasp, please. I had 5 levels, and in order for me to go from what I used to call my nosebleed section back downstairs to do laundry in the basement, I didn't have enough tubing for that, nor did I have enough breath for that. So the major lifestyle change I had to do was to get rid of my home that I lived in. And I now live with my daughter, who's 34 and single. I don't recommend that to anyone. The 2 o'clock in the morning, coming in. But with a chuckle with that is a major thing. My daughter had said to me, I want you to live with me. I don't want you to get another home on one level. I want you to be with me. And as a parent, I don't want my child to take care of me. Of course, I had a choice between her and her brother, and he told me what goes around comes around, and I'd have to be home by 10. So I thought that she was a better choice, since sometimes she doesn't get home until 2, so I could creep in at 1:15.
Thank you,
But
Laura.
that is hard.
Thank you. Okay, and then we also heard some diet and exercise was used to manage some of your symptoms as a therapy. So would somebody like to share some comments on how you've changed your diet or how you've incorporated exercise? But how about let's do a show of hands. We did hear, oh yes, I'm sorry,
After after pulmonary rehab, I decided to go to the gym. Actually, I was going to the gym, but it was not a good gym. So I selected another gym. And when I'm in the gym, I'm always asked, like, why don't you go with me? Or why don't you do this with us? Or so forth. And I was like, no, I do it my way. So where I see the young kids come in and do their thing in half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, I'll take 2 hours, right? And that's actually it on the gym part.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're just going to do a few more show of hands and then we'll go to the phone line. How many of you feel, and caregivers, you know, if you can also respond on behalf of your loved ones, how many of you feel that based on your current therapy that your symptoms are well managed at this time? Okay, I do have one. So I imagine I'm going to see more hands for this next question, which is, how many of you feel that given your current treatment regimen or the treatment regimen that your loved ones are taking, how many of you feel that it's not really under control? Okay, the majority of you. Okay. All right, so let's go to the phone lines. And operator, could we have the first caller?
The first call comes from Christine Williams. You may ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Christine.
Okay, my name is Christine Williams, and I was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis in May of 2009, and I was diagnosed with pulmonary hypertension secondary to it in October 2013. And I just mainly have a couple of comments. First of all, I'd just like to thank the FDA and everyone who has put this forum together. This is probably one of the most important things that I have ever attended, and it's so full of education, and I'm all about advocacy and awareness. The second thing is I wanted to acknowledge 3 people that are there that are on your panel, Talina, Doris, and Laura. I only know them through Facebook. However, I feel that I can call them my friends, and I do call them my friends. And I want not just you to know, but all of you to know how brave and courageous you are for sharing your story and being vulnerable and allowing others into your world, because I know how tough that is. I tend to isolate myself, and I was in a very, very dark place. And when I found these groups, I just knew I wasn't alone, even when I thought I was alone. And I just want to thank them especially. We are bound together by our disease, unfortunately, but I'm so very glad that God decided to put them in my life. And whether you think you are or not, you are a huge, huge inspiration to me. And I want you to know that I love you all, and I thank you for your participation in this event today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing those comments. Let's take another caller.
Your next question comes from, or comment comes from Pete Kaiser. You may ask your question.
This really is a question for yourself. One of the things that really helped me is that it's the humidity control system, trying to filter. It keeps the humidity constant in the 44, which makes a tremendous difference in breathing. So that's one of the benefits.
Okay, thank you. You kept going in and out, but I think what we heard is that humidity control was a beneficial therapy, that it helped to have humidity control. Okay, and do we have one more caller? Oh, that's it? Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to do is just take another minute. I want to make sure that we discuss two things here. One, were there other therapies that you take that weren't mentioned? Is there anything different that you'd like to share in terms of the therapies that you're doing or taking? Yes, Teresa.
One of the things that I hear a lot from patients is a lot of I'll call them alternative therapies, some of the Eastern medicines that they are trying. There are a number of, I'll call them products on the market that promise to reverse fibrosis, that promise to dissolve it, that promise to improve conditions. And a lot of patients are believing that, and maybe it helps them in some way. But anyway, those are very commonly brought up. Also, on a regular, I would say in intervals, I hear about stem cell therapies, and I'm not talking about clinical trials looking at stem cells in IPF. I'm talking about stem cells therapy that is some sort of infusion of your own blood or something. I hear that a lot, and it's like a $50,000 treatment. Patients are using this. I don't know that it's a large number, but it is happening. And there are evidently a few centers that are doing that. I don't know much about it except to tell you that is a commonly brought up issue.
Thank you, Teresa. Okay, and then anybody else want to share any other therapy that they're taking? Okay. Oh, yes.
There's a very well-known activist, and his name is Bill Vick, and I think he's smiling back home now. He believes in the paleo diet, which goes back to nuts and those kind of things. So, and he strongly believes in it, and he's the guy, one of the people that actually was in the movie Every Breath Counts. I don't know whether you've ever heard of it, but if you haven't seen it, look it up online, everybreathcountsfilm.com. It's about IPF.
Thank you very much. Okay, and then I guess the very last question I have for you, and then we're going to wrap up the day and begin our open public comment period, but does anybody want to share any final thoughts on the ideal treatment? I know that we heard many of you say that stopping the progression of the disease, catching it early on, making sure that it's not misdiagnosed. Is there any other thoughts that you have to share regarding the ideal treatment? Yes, we have. Oh, hang on one second. We'll have a microphone come over to you.
Someone commented about a doctor saying, what was the phrase? It's no big deal. That was said to my brother who has IPF by a primary care physician. And maybe it's not the purview of this particular public meeting, but that seems to be a big issue, that the primary care doctors aren't picking up on this. And my brother eventually, when he got a cold and a bad respiratory infection and pneumonia and so forth, that was, all hell broke loose and so forth. And that was like 7 or 8 months after a doctor looked at an x-ray and said, I see some, webbing or whatever, but it's no big deal.
So more awareness, understanding of the condition. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll take one more comment and then we'll wrap up. Yes, go ahead, Heather.
I just want to mention one thing about the doctors and the hospitals and all the physicians don't know a lot about pulmonary fibrosis. And when patients come into the emergency room, they don't know how to take care of them. They really don't understand that, I was given an IV with a lot of fluids. That's what threw me in respiratory failure. I wasn't in respiratory failure until that happened. And all the liquid went around my heart and lungs. And within 24 hours, I was almost dead. So those type of initiatives, and we need to speak out how to handle this. And I know I don't think the patients here or the family members here, but a story I heard from a family member yesterday was a doctor had told her that, and I've never heard of a doctor say that, but that was my idea and my experience, And she went into the hospital with her husband, and they were going to call security on her because she was adamant to not allow them to put an IV in him. And that's how bad it got, to call security and everything. But I think that needs to be looked at and brought to attention.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We've had such for us, I know that we have learned so much from you on not just symptoms and the impact and living with IPF on a daily basis, but the treatments that you're taking. And we sincerely appreciate how much you've shared with us and opened up, and you've taught us so much today. So we thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to get started with the open public comment period. So Pujita, if you'd like to.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. And we're now moving on to the open public comment session. And for those of you who are not aware, the purpose of this session is to allow an opportunity for those who have not had a chance to speak on issues that are not related to our two main discussion topics today. So this is an opportunity for folks who are not a patient or a patient representative to comment. Please keep in mind that we will not be responding to your comments, but they will be transcribed and be part of the public record. Since we would like this process to be transparent, we encourage you to note any financial interests, if any, that you have that are related to your comment. So we have collected sign up before, during the registration and during the break. And so far we have 5 people signed up and about 15 minutes. So we'll probably give each person about 3 minutes to speak. Please be respectful for your other colleagues here and other patients, and try to stick to that 3-minute mark. And if you do start to approach that 3 minutes, I will need to ask you to start wrapping up. So I will run through the order of speakers, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. First, we have Sally Okun, then Donna Appel, Greg Cosgrove, David Lederer, and then Dolly Kravitsky. So could I first please have Sally Okun?
Well, thank you so much, and I want to really thank the FDA for taking the opportunity to study this very important condition. I'm from Patients Like Me, and about March 8 of 2013, we opened an IPF community. Today we have over 2,500 people who are participating on the site, who are actively engaging in not only socializing with each other and supporting each other, but more importantly, in many ways, really gathering data on a day-to-day basis about their experiences with treatments and symptoms, as well as other opportunities to participate in projects that we're doing either with industry or academic research groups. So we have a huge amount of information I think that could be useful. But I also wanted to reinforce 2 important pieces that actually have been brought up, but maybe haven't really been reinforced enough. 25% of our patients tell us that it takes them more than 3 clinicians to get to the point of getting a diagnosis over periods of years. And so this is really abysmal. We have to help people get diagnosed more quickly, and we've heard that throughout the day today. So I think there has to be an opportunity for us to be speaking to clinicians. And as a palliative care clinician, I can tell you my own experience in caring for these patients is it's desperate. It's a time in their life when they're trying to figure out what's going on, and people are just telling them that it's going to be okay and we'll be all right, and it's frankly not. So I think we have to get beyond that. Last thing I wanted to say, and again, thank you for the time, is to really the focus on patient-reported outcomes. We have an opportunity. We heard so much about feeling and function today and the impacts of the things that are happening to patients on a day-to-day basis. We really need to get to the point where those endpoints are the ones that actually matter in the clinical trials, along with the biomarkers, because we actually learned about things that are non-drug therapies and other interventions. And just to let you know, on our site, one of the most important things that people said was in our survey when we asked them about these same questions that helped them day-to-day live their day in and day out were the social connectedness aspects of their world, where they made virtual or real connections with other people and were able to share their experiences on a regular basis. So I think those aren't things that you can measure in a pharmacological study per se without asking the patient-reported outcomes on that. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Sally. Next, we have Donna Appel.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you so much to the FDA for listening to all of this. I think it was hard for everybody, and it means a lot to us to have this accessibility. It means a great deal. Gives us some sort of hope, and that's medicinal. So I also want to apologize to the 3 people that might be coming after me, but I have to get a taxi to get a plane, so I'm going to be leaving right after this comment. So I represent the Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome people. I have a daughter with Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. She has HPS type 1, so we knew 27 years ago that she would be dying of pulmonary fibrosis. And our people look at it, staring it in the face, watching all the activity and their friends, and know that it's coming, because 100% of the time in HPS 1, 2, and 4, they will develop pulmonary fibrosis. We're the great knockout mouse for pulmonary fibrosis studies. So why am I here? Because it's not idiopathic. Well, I guess there are drugs that are coming to you and in front of you that have been tried in the idiopathic arena, and I can't change that. But my request is for you to think about in future applications to try to get rid of that word idiopathic for the rest of us. And why? One of the reasons is because we pay our medical bills as idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So we're kind of paying. They don't pay for Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome pulmonary fibrosis. They pay for IPF. And then I started the organization 22 years ago. And I feel very sad that for 22 years I've been educating people and pulmonologists about it's not idiopathic, it's Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. And darn if I should have just kept my mouth shut so that my patients could actually get medications for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And I go to bed feeling bad about that. So our misdiagnosis is great because there are a lot of people out there that actually have HPS, PF. And then let's think about that. There are a lot of different causes. I know that in the beginning, it was mentioned the diverse phenotypes. Well, we're diverse phenotype, and there's exposure, and it's going to be genetics and familial, and it's going to be the combination of both. So why not just ditch the idiopathic idea and just treat pulmonary fibrosis and open it up to everyone? Reason why we might be personally feel like we need it is because in 1999, our patients were on pirfenidone before it was even owned by Intimmune, when it was with Marnac, based on the fact that it was an antifibrotic. And our people were the phase 2 trial people for that drug, which possibly helped it actually go on further. We have anecdotal reports that our patients are still doing well on it, and it's a blessing that it's finally coming to the market. I worry that our people might have it off-label. Our uninsured, our disenfranchised might have a really hard time getting the drug. So that needs to be done, and that's my 3 minutes, I think. Is that what you're waving to me about? Thank you very much for having this opportunity, and thank you for listening to us all today.
Thank you, Donna. Next, we have Greg Cosgrove.
Hello, I'm Greg Cosgrove. I'm a pulmonologist from National Jewish in Denver, and I'm also the Chief Medical Officer for the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. So I'm speaking on behalf of the 100,000 patients with pulmonary fibrosis in the United States, and I humbly submit the data from our survey with over 1,400 respondents over the past 3.5 weeks to the questions directly registered or queried in the registry, and that's been submitted and will be available for anyone's review. What is important is I think there's a unique opportunity here, and it's unique in that everyone has the same goal. We understand misdiagnosis is incredibly problematic. Misunderstanding, and that's not just by patients, but by physicians, whether they're pulmonologists or primary care physicians. And that's been distressing as a pulmonologist sitting in the audience today to understand the travesty of misdiagnosis and perhaps limited ability to intervene when intervention could have significantly improved symptoms. And so the challenges are who to treat. We've heard patients, you're too healthy for treatment. Some you're too sick for treatment. And it kind of harkens back to the prior discussion about which patients should receive therapy with pulmonary fibrosis, because idiopathic is one of the 200 different diseases, but there are many other diseases that are rapidly progressive and debilitate patients with almost identical symptoms. And so the challenges are quite apparent. The opportunities are even more readily achievable to collaborate together, not just in academia, but with governmental agencies, with industry partners to advance the field. How can we do that? One mission we have is to set up a network, a care center network across the United States with a registry. We can begin to quantify patient-related outcomes. We can collaborate together to better care for patients, enhance awareness, enhance awareness, enhance education, and in doing so, I think we can rapidly advance this field to improve care, not just for one disease, but for many diseases. Importantly, IPF is one that is devastating given its mortality, but it's one of 200, and I think we need to think about that as we move forward. There's a unique opportunity with many medications and many trials. Unfortunately, based on our data, 14% of patients avail themselves of the opportunity of a clinical trial. Why is that? 57% say their doctors never even addressed it. And so with a network, hopefully we can rapidly evaluate medications moving forward, rapidly implement evidence-based therapies so that we're just not treating symptoms, but hopefully we treat the disease, and more importantly, we treat the patient. So I thank you for this time.
Thank you, Greg. Next, we have David Letter.
Thank you very much. My name is Dave Lederer. As disclosure, I'm a consultant for Gilead, Intermune, Boehringer Ingelheim, and ImmuneWorks, matters related to IPF clinical trials. I'm a pulmonologist in clinical practice, taking care of patients with pulmonary fibrosis and lung transplant recipients. I'm also a medical advisor for the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation on patient communications. Today I want to share with you a perspective I think summarizes quite well what was discussed today, maybe adds a little bit of additional insight. So I often hear from healthcare professionals, particularly doctors, and from patients that there's nothing that we can do for this disease. Of course, this is untrue. We do many things for this disease, and we've talked about it today. Aggressive oxygen therapy, getting people off of toxic therapies, getting people enrolled in pulmonary rehabilitation. But this statement that there's nothing to do is rooted in our paltry armamentarium, which right now consists of a blank prescription pad. What my patients need today, right now, are therapies that help them live longer, healthier, more normal, and independent lives. Therapies that slow progression of the disease. We also need to improve healthcare delivery to PF patients. Most patients don't show up to an ILD Center of Excellence for 2 or more years after their symptoms have begun. We know that people who show up earlier have better outcomes regardless of disease severity. We need to educate healthcare providers about how to recognize, how to diagnose, and manage this disease better. And we also need to prioritize research in oxygen delivery methods. Oxygen should be free. Oxygen should never run out. Devices should be lightweight and discreet. And we need to study the benefits of oxygen combined with exercise. These are the only things that make anyone with this disease feel better. So that's today. But tomorrow we need something more. We need therapies that halt fibrosis in its tracks, therapies that heal lung tissue, therapies that eliminate shortness of breath and cough, therapies that allow people to return to the independent life they once had. And tomorrow we need to be able to grow a biological lung in a box or develop an artificial lung that we can use instead of lung transplantation and avoid those harmful therapies. In short, we need a cure. And I see a day, as Teresa said, someday in the not too distant future when no one will die from pulmonary fibrosis. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And lastly, we have Dolly.
Hi, I'm Dolly Kravitsky with the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. First, I'd like to thank the FDA and all of the patients and the family members that are here participating in this meeting and sharing your very personal stories. I know how difficult it is, and we didn't have enough tissues in this room. Let me just say that, because you all have amazingly touching stories to share, and I hope that the FDA listened carefully to all of those stories, because those are the stories that I live with every day, working in the capacity that I do with the foundation. It's very touching. So the one thing that I think is very important for all of us to consider is that finding treatments for this devastating disease requires participation from all of us in this room. This is a very good first step. I think it needs to be followed up. We need to continue on this path. Right now, there are 2 drugs being reviewed by the FDA. They are for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And as Donna said, and I'm sorry she's not here to hear this, but there are many other patients with devastating fibrotic lung disease that do not have therapies. So finding and making sure that those patients are not forgotten and that we continue on this path becomes very important to all patients with pulmonary fibrosis. One of the ways that I think is really helpful to the community is the creation of a guidance for industry in developing therapies, really accelerating the development and review of therapies for all fibrotic lung diseases, similar to what the Duchenne's Multiple Dystrophy Foundation did, working on clinical trial design, outcome measures and considerations, so that we can move the science forward and really make an impact in this disease. Dr. Cosgrove talked a little bit about clinical trials and designs. When we looked at the survey results that we did, I have to say that I was pretty surprised that 42% of patients did not participate because they were concerned that they would get a placebo and their disease would continue to progress. So that is something that we have to fix within the system. So if we create well-intentioned clinical trial designs and guidance, that we can move the science forward, and hopefully many of us in this room will be talking about how well they're doing and thanking all of the people involved for finding a treatment, eventually a cure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolly. So that ends our open public comment period. Now I'd like to call upon Dr. Banu Karimi Shah for the closing.
Okay, I brought my notes up here with me because I know that today we were supposed to be in listening mode, and I was, but I was also in writing mode. So I wrote down a lot, and I don't want to leave anyone out, but I'm going to just take a little time to be the last one today to express our gratitude once again. We're so thankful that all of you were able to be here. I learned so much today, and I know that it wasn't just a great learning opportunity for me, but for all of us here at the FDA. And because I can't talk about everything that everyone said, it'll all be captured in the minutes, I know. I just want to go over some of the things that really resonated with me today, and I'm sure resonated with a lot of us. Number one, oxygen. Oxygen resonated with me today. And as Talina said, IPF patients need oxygen. But and I'm a pulmonologist, I know this, but one of the things that really resonated with me today was the panic around oxygen, the planning that's necessary around oxygen, the fear that's associated with oxygen and running out of oxygen. As Bill said, the feeling like you're in jail. And feeling that no one is equipped to take care of you where you go unless you bring it with you. So that's one of the things that really resonated with me today. Another thing that really resonated with me today are the things that the patients and the caregivers have given up. Diane talked about the beach. Laura talked about power walking, travel, hobbies, jobs, long conversations, laughing, sports, driving, your homes, and time. You give up time, not just the time that you lose to the disease in terms of your lifespan, but everyday time, because it takes so much longer to do things. The most menial of tasks takes so much longer. So the time issue really resonated with me today. The cough, I know not everyone experiences the cough, but the characteristics of the cough also resonated with me today. How tiring it can be, how violent it can be, how embarrassing it can be. How it comes on with even small exertions, that it's difficult to sometimes end it, and that you're often left completely exhausted after it. Again, I'm a pulmonologist. I know about the shortness of breath. But I think what Heather said resonated with me, that it feels like a tightening of the noose around the neck. Somebody commented on the fact that they have to remember to breathe, and to know what it's like to drown. So those things really made an impact on me today. And so I'd like to close because I know that we're a little bit over, or maybe almost just on time. I'm a pulmonologist. I trained at a place where IPF patients were treated, where lung transplants were available. And today I was reminded, I took care of patients with IPF before I came to the FDA as a clinician. And today I was reminded about the patient community again, which was so valuable to me, because both the patients and the caregivers have so much to teach us. And I was reminded again that you're scared, but that fear doesn't make you shy away from things, it makes you stronger. And you're motivated to go to aerobics classes and to the gym so that you can get your lung transplant. You're motivated to deal with the side effects of your drugs and to change your lifestyles so that you can live better and feel better. And you have hope despite all the bad things that happen, despite the misdiagnoses, despite not knowing whether or not certain treatments are working, despite uncontrolled symptoms. And you have a great sense of humor because despite the sort of weighty topic in the room, there was a lot of laughter today. And that you're selfless, because there were a lot of comments today that said, we know that maybe the therapies that are coming down the line aren't going to help us, but they're going to help our children, and they could help others, and you want it for other people. And we heard what you want. Bill wants an app, so I wrote that down. But everybody just wants more time and more quality time to spend living their lives and with their loved ones. And you want a voice early on in drug development, and we hear that. So we've really had the privilege of listening to everyone in the room today. You've thanked us, and so I'd like to close by thanking you. Your stories were so important to us, both all the people here and on the phone and on the web. Everything you've said today was very, very valuable to us. And please know that at FDA, we do shoulder the responsibility of developing drugs for IPF and moving science forward. And this weighs on us, and we don't take it lightly. So thank you very much. So I just have two additional comments. One is if you don't mind filling out your evaluation form. If you didn't already receive one, we have more at the registration desk and we can bring you one. And second, very importantly, please make sure that you submit any additional thoughts or comments or experiences to the public docket, which was the website that I had shown you earlier on. But please make sure you go there and continue providing your feedback there. So thank you again. Thank you all so much for being here today.
One last comment. Please don't take those little clickers with you. We need those.